Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am thrilled to have in the virtual studio today the salary coach. And the salary coach is none other than John Gates. And I'd encourage you to check out his LinkedIn profile. Now, it's just as simple as that, John, and then Gates, Gates. You're going to see lots of titles in his career: recruiting process architect, head of global recruitment. I've done that. Director of recruiting operations, head of talent acquisition. I've done that. And here's how it all comes together in terms of what we're going to discuss on the People Dividend podcast. And I would appreciate your likes to the podcast. One of my one of my contributors said yesterday, I never asked, so here I'm asking. But let's get back to John Gates, the salary coach. You can find out more about him at salary.coach. He brings 30 years of experience in negotiating compensation packages, salary, incentives, and benefits. He's been responsible for more than 75,000 extended offers. I often wondered, for all of our listeners in human resources, the vast majority of our audiences, when every offer had to go out under my signature, I often wondered about that. And, the recruiting coordinators would get bent out of shape if the auto signature thing wasn't working. I don't know how many times we had problems with things like that. But let's get back to John Gates. He's switched companies. He started companies. He understands the anxieties that job seekers face as they move through the market. And he knows what recruiters are thinking as the process unfolds. So again, I'm so glad to have the salary coach, John Gates, with us today. And John, why don't you say a few words about yourself to our audience?
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that introduction. It's really great. So I've been a recruiter and a recruiting leader on the corporate side most of my career. I've started my own agency before. My first 5 years of experience were recruiting agencies. So I've worked on both sides of the house, but most of my career has been spent on the other side of the negotiating table. I've been directly responsible for executive recruitment at multiple Fortune 500 companies and run fairly large recruiting teams on multiple continents. So when it comes to pay negotiation and what I do as the salary coach, I'm kind of like the prosecutor who has become the defense attorney, because most of my time has been on that other side of the negotiating table. So I understand all the politics, all the process. I know where all of the landmines are hidden. And I know why job seekers are afraid to negotiate their pay. It feels very, very high risk. And I know how to make that risk almost zero. So if you knew how to make the risk almost zero, you probably would be a lot more willing to negotiate your pay. And that's what I teach people, and that's what I do every single day.
Well, now with that setup, you've got to say, how do you reduce the risk and make it zero?
Well, it's never zero. It's almost zero. I think it's the fair thing to say, because anytime you're negotiating, the unexpected things can happen, but really it is almost zero if you handle it right. The biggest thing people are afraid of, well, there are two things. One is, when that recruiter calls you for your dream job. Let's say you always wanted to work for NASA, Mike, and NASA suddenly calls you on the phone and says, Mike, we saw your resume, we saw your LinkedIn profile. I'd love to talk to you about this great job we have at NASA. But first, what's your pay expectation? That's a loaded question, and you know that if you answer it wrong, you're not moving forward. Your dream job's at stake, so you undermine yourself here. You cut your own throat. You lowball your own self. And so you do this to manage the risk of being bounced out of the process at this point, because you think the risk is high. So at this step, I coach people to use a range instead of a number early on to satisfy the recruiter. They have to believe that they can get you. And so you don't have to paint yourself into a corner if you know how to do that right. You can move forward in the process without cutting your own throat, all while keeping the risk very, very minimal. The biggest point of risk is at the point of offer. So somebody offers you the job. Mike, NASA wants to offer you the job. Here's the offer. I think 80% of people don't negotiate that at all because, hey, it's the dream job and I don't want to mess it up. They have this idea in their mind that if they even challenge that offer at all, that company's just going to rip it away. That's the worst disaster of all. If you're in between jobs, like you're sick and tired of the uncertainty of it, I know what that feels like. So there's a huge temptation to just accept the offer to avoid that risk, even if it's small. But I coach my clients to take a collaboration approach at this stage, avoid ultimatums. And that's what I call the salary coach method. It's an end-to-end process designed to maximize your pay while minimizing the risk all along.
It's great. And for many, salary isn't the only negotiable.
Correct. Salary is one of many elements. Companies have a pay, kind of a pay mix plan, right? They have base salary. Sometimes they have incentives. Sometimes they have stock and long-term incentives. They have benefits. But a lot of things are negotiable. You can, like a lot of people want to work remotely, or they want to work. I was just talking to a client today. A company said, we've got a hybrid situation here. It's 3 days a week in the office. And she said, John, I can only do 2. What can I do? Right? The number of days you're in the office, believe it or not, is negotiable in many cases. Sometimes it's not, but there are safe ways of discovering if it's negotiable or not. PTO is another thing, like paid time off. We negotiate on this front all the time. And sometimes you have to negotiate for informal paid time off because they can't alter the policy for you. But there are other ways of getting it. The location of the position, the title, the level, the scope, even your department budget sometimes can be negotiated. But you have to do things the right way at the right time. For senior executives, even negotiating severance on the way in is possible. You just have to know when to do that, how to do that. And for that particular issue, the when is more important than the how. But it's like discussing a prenuptial agreement like the night before the wedding. It's really awkward. Most people don't want to do it. But there is a way to do that. And I think, especially given things like chief marketing officers are lasting 2 years on average, you really should be talking about this if you're in the C-suite.
Yes, and certainly it was common in the executive positions for which I filled, mostly brought to me by retained search. I mean, lots of different ways to consider that. And John, tell us though, for other job seekers, we talked about PTO, we talked about paid time off, we talked about benefits, other remuneration plans offered by an organization. How accurate not how accurate, but what's your view of sources like Glassdoor, for example?
For benefits or pay?
Yes,
or
all of the above.
I think Glassdoor is dubious.
I agree.
It's a source of information, but keep in mind that this is people who worked there, used to work there, or said they worked there. You don't know who's actually posting. It's really hard for them to verify the information. You don't know if they're talking about stuff that was 3 years ago or yesterday. It's really just a finger in the wind. Now, I would use Glassdoor for something like maybe if you're looking for the cultural red flags. You're reading all these employee reviews and they all say the same thing, that this is bad or that's bad. It might not be bad. It might just be the disgruntled people going there to complain. but gives you something to explore to satisfy your curiosity about during the interview process. You can confirm it yourself, but Glassdoor is not something I would put a lot of stock in. Here's another thing you don't really know. You don't know if the person posting their salary is a low performer, a mid performer, or a high performer. So a lot of times, how much you're getting paid depends entirely upon how useful you are to an organization. People can inflate their titles. They can do a lot of things on there. It's unverified user provided information.
Now, I think you started to explore this about why negotiating before you get the job makes all the difference, just as it might be with the a screening call once you get to a recruiter or you get to a talent scout or however you want to think about people performing those services.
Yep.
To respond to, what are your salary expectations, to respond with a range. So why do you negotiate, though, before you get the job? Why does that make all of the difference?
Well, I think as soon as you say yes to the job, like you've lost all of your leverage. And sometimes companies make promises about things like they'll say, well, we haven't created that bonus program yet. We're planning to do that 6 months in, but I promise you'll get that. Or we intend to promote you very rapidly. Within the first 8 months, we can adjust your title to this, that, or the other thing. So once you say yes and you join, like you don't have any leverage anymore. You got to remember that when they offer you the position, they want you to say yes. And if you've got a few things that you want, now's the time to ask for them. You can withhold your yes in exchange for some things. And it depends a bit on how much they want you. If there's a silver medalist breathing down your neck, they might not budge on some of these things. But if you ask for things in the right way, you can explore if it's possible to do it now instead of later.
Well, and as a human resources executive, there was always a range at which you could, bring people into an organization. It might be in terms of RSUs, more or less. It might be in terms of salary compensation. It might be in terms of things that are important to employees. There's no harm in asking.
Yes. No harm in asking. And I think that's key to the salary coach method is being curious, asking the right questions at the right time. And the money phrase. So if you're listening to this and you want to know how to immediately upgrade your negotiating ability while keeping it safe, ask, is it possible? Now, you're not going to put the offer at risk by asking if something's possible. The answer is going to be yes, no, or maybe. And it tells you something about what you might be able to.
Yeah, I don't think it's uncommon. If a candidate makes a reasonable request at the end of the process after they see the offer letter, say, "Could I have another 5% or something?" And if the first offer's gone out, the second offer is probably going to go out unless it's an unreasonable request. Now, also having inhabited a lot of big organizations, I know that changing an offer letter can be very difficult. Maybe the HR manager has, he or she or they can make, choices A, B, C, D, and E. You put it in, you tell your talent acquisition partners, but other aspects become very difficult to change. Now, I think that's one thing, but so much employment in the United States is driven in small organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true. The bigger the organization, the more bureaucracy there is around extending job offers. Because you're right, there's going to be a convoluted approval process sometimes. There's a lot more controls outside of the hiring manager's hands in bigger organizations. And understanding those politics is helpful. Because if you're interviewing with a bigger organization, it's really important to try to get the initial offer as close as possible to what you want. If you're 30% low in that initial offer, it's politically very difficult to close that gap, even if the hiring manager wants to. That's because I know what happens. You go in and you interview. Maybe they're interviewing 3 or 4 other people. There's going to be a debrief meeting with somebody like me after that's all done. And I'm going to ask the hiring manager, well, who do you want to hire? And they say, well, I want to hire Mike Horne. He's really great. We really like Mike. And the hiring manager will then ask me, what is it going to take to get Mike? What kind of offer do we need to make? I'm going to provide some input. The manager's going to be looking at all the other people on the team and how this person might compare to other people. And then they create this sort of package that has to go through an approval process. They're telling their boss and all these other powerful people in the company, sometimes even the board of directors, here's what I think it's going to take to get Mike. We really like him. And they're going to say, well, okay, defend that. Justify it. And so they justify it. And then let's say you come back and you say, you know what, this is really disappointing. It needs to be 30% higher or we can't do this. That hiring manager is not going to go back. Very, very rarely would they want to go run the gauntlet again and say, I made a mistake. His value is actually much higher. His credibility takes a hit. And so that's why it's really hard to adjust these things.
And there's truth in what you've said. If a candidate lists a desired salary, let's just make up numbers. I want $100,000. Mm-hmm. And, in California, most wage scales are publicly accessible. Here's the range of compensation for your job. And that's what it is. But if you have a candidate who has declared an intention of, I just need $100,000 for this, and your range is, $100,000 to $150,000, I think it's unlikely as, the HR advisor or the HR business partner, you'd probably advise your client, well, bring the person in at $100,000 to your earlier point, and then in 8, 12, or 18 months, we can really take care of them. And that means not much at all.
Yep, exactly. Because those promises are often not kept. They're forgotten about. As soon as the pressure to get the person is off the table, they forget about the promise that they made to you. Other priorities are now biting at their ankles. 6 months from now, they'll forget they had that conversation. And if they do remember it, it's like they're far less committed to it.
And now you provide compensation coaching for experienced professionals and executives in job transition. Unpack that for our audience. What does that mean? I'm an HR leader. What does that mean?
Okay. So somebody has decided to leave their current position, or they have had that decided for them. They've been laid off. They're in between. Either way, they're moving from one job to another. So I believe, Mike, that the best and easiest and the easiest raise you'll ever get is the one that you negotiate on the way into a company. Once you're in there, as an HR leader, you probably know, now you're subject to HR policies, everything else. Even if they want to promote you, they're going to blunt that promotion financially. They're going to say, well, our policy says for a 2-grade promotion, you're limited to 10%.
And what I would add to that is just my experience, just to supplement you, is that, I would tell most people you have 2 chances to negotiate basically. It's when you come in and it's when you're leaving. And, in between, a lot of times, managers are constrained. No, exceptional performance, different story.
Yeah. There are some exceptions, of course, but that's a good general rule. So when you're on the move, when you decide it's time to make a change, whether it's strategic or reactionary, this is an opportunity that you can't ignore. Like, you have tremendous leverage once you're the selected candidate to improve your offer and to see where that goes. Sometimes just by asking a few key target questions, you could move things up $25,000 or $50,000. And that's money that they'll forget that they gave you 3 days after you start.
Just like how many RSUs are you coming in at the high end or at the low end? Nobody will remember.
Yep, it's true. Once a year, maybe the hiring manager, the person you're reporting to, might pull a report that shows like how all their people are stacking up against each other, what quartile of the range you're sitting in. And that's just to decide how much of a raise you're going to get going forward. So I think people are staying fewer and fewer years now. A lot of people have discovered that if they stay at a company for 8 or 10 years, they end up falling behind the market. And it's almost an open joke within companies. People start saying, I'd be doing better if I left and came back.
Oh, sure.
Because you can negotiate easier if you leave and come back. You have a lot more leverage in that situation because you can say no. I've decided not to come back.
In my experience, and I'm
Yes.
curious about yours, John, last-ditch efforts to save people are rarely successful in the long term.
Yes, I agree.
There are exceptions.
Yeah, there are always exceptions, but I think it's wise to live your life by the most probable outcome. And so, being a recruiter for so long, I've seen this happen over and over again, where I've extended an offer to somebody and they go to resign, and their boss says, Mike, I really need you here. I didn't know you were so dissatisfied. What can we do to make you stay? What are your problems? What are your feelings? We'll deal with all of that. Most of the time, the reason why they offer that is because you're about to fire your boss. And it's going to make your boss look bad. They are now inconvenienced by a sudden departure. And they're trying to correct that. They're trying to control that. The problem is, usually these counteroffers come at you as money. We're going to give you a raise. We're going to give you some financial inducement to stay. It might give you a promotion or something like that. But now the trust is broken. They, in the back of their mind, they're wondering, well, Mike almost left us. I wonder if I should give Mike this really important project to work on. I think not. I think I'm going to give that to Susie instead. Because Susie is committed, and I'm not sure about Mike right now. And very often, money isn't the reason why you would resign in the first place. Most of the time, it's because they haven't kept their promises to you, or the work is toxic, or you don't like certain things that you can't change. The money is flattering, and it's hard to fire your boss, especially now when they're begging you and flattering you and all this. But as a recruiter, I can tell you, I've had people pull out of accepted offers because they got a counter offer, decided to stay, and almost this is almost predictable. 8 to 12 months later, they're knocking on my door again saying, it didn't work out. At the next layoff, they got laid off because their loyalty was questioned. They're on the way out anyway. They won't mind if I just cut them. Their upward mobility is blunted because the loyalty is questioned. The money didn't fix the real problem. And now that they're used to the money, the real problem just continues to nag and bug them. So this happens more than it doesn't happen.
I think about one of the C-suite executives that I supported, and let's say some very talented person was going to leave the organization, and the VP or the SVP would get all, oh my gosh, the sky is falling if we don't retain this person. And so, along with the C-suite executive, the SVP or the VP would, strike some deals. They'd exclude me from the conversation sometimes as the HR person, and, without the realization that, I signed off on the offer. So, didn't really matter in some ways.
Yeah, it's just a sticky deal. And I think if you decide to leave, the wisest career decision is to stick with that decision. Because if you leave, you honor your commitment, you could always go back to the company you're leaving later. And people do that all the time. They go from company A to company B. 2 or 3 years later, they're back to company A. And guess what? The trust circle is never broken if you do it that way. If you accept the counteroffer, they're always suspicious that you're on your way out. It's just something that will haunt your career if you do it.
Yes, I recall one situation when I announced my resignation or turned in my resignation, however you want to think about it. And, the U.S. president or some big muckety muck in the organization flew me to Palm Beach, where we had our U.S. headquarters, and, offered me all kinds of money and just didn't leave a very good taste in my mouth. And I decided to separate, anyway, despite what would have been a big financial gain. And I went to this other organization based on a promise that I would travel a lot less because I was in consulting. I worked for a big firm. And
Sure.
when I arrived at my new job, I was in Paris 6 weeks later. So I went to the president of the company and I said, my gifts here, I was pretty clear I wanted to be off. And he said, you should realize that, at your age that a lot of managers don't tell the truth. So anyway, but it leads to this integrity cycle and everything. John Gates, how do people get in touch with salary.coach, you, the salary coach? When do they engage you and who engages you?
Sure. So how to engage me is fairly easy. You can email me at john@salary.coach. That's my direct email address. Or you can connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me there. I'm always posting about little paid negotiation tips and customer success stories and things like that. I want to keep people encouraged that you can have everything you want. You just need to know how to say things and how to get through the process. So the other question is, who do I engage with? And mostly I'm working with salaried job seekers. I have a couple of different ways that I engage with people. I have something called the Salary Coach Academy, which is recorded video lessons on how to talk about pay at every single step. This is probably best for people who are mid-career and below, people who want to know the insider secrets. They want to understand the salary coach method, but maybe they don't want, a private coach, which is frankly a lot more expensive. Kind of director level and above people are mostly who I'm privately coaching. The stakes are very high in that group. The complexity is high. Usually you've got RSUs or options or some kind of equity position. There's a whole lot more to variable comp the higher up you go. And there are many, many tricks for, extracting the natural resources from an offer that I can help people to get through. My average client that I'm privately coaching is usually getting 10 to 20% additional in their pay package. Sometimes it's a lot more than that. I had a C-suite person not too long ago over the summer closed an offer out, and we improved his offer by over $600,000. He almost left that on the table, believe it or not. He was ready to accept the initial offer because of that fear we discussed earlier. So I walked him through the finish line personally, and we got everything the CEO was willing to offer him, and they were both excited at the finish line, and that's the goal at the end. So there are lots of ways that I can teach people how to do this. I'm on a mission to teach people how to do this because, knowing how to negotiate your pay is a critical life skill. Most people do not know how to do this, and they misunderstand what negotiation is. They think it's high risk game of chicken, and that's not what it is. It can be very safe if you know how to do it, and that's what I'm teaching people. I want to demystify this for the world.
Well, it's been so wonderful to be in conversation with the salary coach, John Gates. You'll find all of the ways to contact him in the show notes. And just as we begin to wrap up our discussion, John, as we're navigating through the remainder of 2025 and growth in certain job markets, shrinkage in other job markets, What does your crystal insight tell us, if anything, about employment outlooks in the U.S.?
Huh. That is a very good question, Mike. I think that this year is going to be much better than last year. I think the last 2 years have been pure hell for job seekers. There have been so many layoffs. The introduction of AI is very disruptive. Plus, we were in the middle of a presidential election cycle. And every 4 years before the president is elected, C-suite executives they push the pause button sometimes on their growth plans because they want to know what the monetary policy is going to be, what the trade policy is going to be, all that stuff. So if I were to pull out the crystal ball, I would suggest there are some industries are going to be on the upswing while others might be in decline. I'd suggest that maybe the green technology, that has been on the upswing under one administration is probably going to be on the downswing in the current one, whereas natural resources and manufacturing will probably be expanding greatly. That's kind of the way I see it. But most of my clients right now, as of this recording, it's February. In January, they started noticing their phones ringing a lot more. And that could be that now we know who the president's going to be for the next 4 years. It's also
Budgets are released.
Companies have a fresh budget, right? Fresh budget. I think every executive team in the world, at least in the United States, probably went for a strategic planning offsite in January. They go to these things to say, all right, what are we going to do for the next couple of years? And they come out of that with marching orders that translate into open positions.
Very good. I'll just end this episode of the People Dividend Podcast. It's been a great conversation with John Gates, the salary coach who offers compensation coaching for experienced professionals and executives in job transition, and lots of other services through his academy. I worked for one very successful CEO, board chair, and board member at 3 prestigious companies. When it came to the topic of conversation, so I was often in the room when these considerations were made in HR, his response, you mean we're going to have benefits again this year? So just to your earlier point about, when you engage in these conversations so critical, you might as well start early. All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, John Gates. And until the next episode of the People Dividend, please send a like to wherever you're listening, or if you watch on YouTube, that'd be great. So until the next episode, stay well.